Well, the first thing that I tell anybody who asks me about what do I do when early grief is self-care. Whatever it is for you, do it. If you need to crochet or watercolor or go for a walk or go swimming or whatever it is, do it. You have to take care of yourself first. And
Yeah.
when you do that, you can find this happiness. You can live in happiness. You can forgive everything that needs to be forgiven. You can let go of blame, anything like that, so that you're really living in a positive space that allows you to experience that happiness.
Oh, that is so good. That's another dimension of self-care. All thoughts, beliefs, it's all energetic patterns, and some are really dense and low frequency, some are lighter, higher frequency. None of them are bad. It's just what are we navigating right now? But the more that we can get present to lack of forgiveness, judgment of others, the more that we can let that go and release that, which we hear all the time. But these are the times of like, oh, that's running me. But if I can be willing and courageous enough to let it go, then I can actually free myself up. That's a new quantum level of self care. Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Fire and Soul, this space to deepen your divine alignment and further activate your spiritual awakening. And I'm really happy that you're tuning in today because I have a super special guest joining us, Emily Thiroux Threatt. She's been a long time student, client, and then become friend as a result of launching her own podcast, the Grief and Happiness podcast, through our podcast accelerator program. And then our podcast accelerator collective. It is a very long time, almost 3 years membership. And it's been in that space that I've had the privilege and honor to get to know her. So I'm excited to bring someone that I have such a connection with, and I just honor her mission so deeply. And that's why we're bringing her in, because she's so spot on for what we're really working through and navigating on Fire and Soul. So a little brief background, and then I'll welcome her onto the show live. Emily Thiroux Threatt is an author, podcast host, speaker, and facilitator of the Grief and Happiness Alliance. Her books include Loving and Living Your Way Through Grief, a comprehensive guide to reclaiming and cultivating joy and carrying on in the face of loss. Love that title. The Grief and Happiness Handbook, a supportive guide to help you reclaim your life while grieving. The Grief and Happiness Cards, gentle support for dealing with grief and finding happiness. She's also the host of the Grief and Happiness podcast, as I mentioned. And especially in these times of uncertainty and loss, all of us need support to effectively navigate life's challenges with tools that can make the journey a bit easier. With much personal experience of grief and loss, Emily can offer audiences real answers on how to deal with grief and move forward to a life filled with happiness and love. I am so excited that you are here. Welcome to Fire and Soul, Emily.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really look forward to talking to you.
Such a joy. It's like a continuation of sort of a lot of behind the scenes for us. But for those of you who aren't as familiar with your work and the dharmic mission that you have stepped into so fully, can you share kind of like the Cliff Notes version of whatever feels alive and relevant that you would like to share right now, that might also include why the Grief and Happiness Alliance and what does that mean for you? And then we'll jump in from there.
Okay, that would be great. Well, as Michelle mentioned, I've dealt with a lot of loss in my life, including two husbands.
Mm.
And the second husband died 2 years after we moved to Maui. And so I didn't know a whole lot of people at that point because those 2 years I'd been taking care of him. And I thought, okay, now what do I do?
Mhm.
So I turned into a lot of self-reflection and did that by writing. Um, I am a writer. I taught writing at the university level for most of my career. And it just seemed like a natural thing to do. And the more I wrote, the more I could see how I could help other people who were dealing with grief by writing.
Mm.
And so that's kind of what started this whole thing.
Mm.
And then
Mm.
shortly after, just a few months after Ron died, a good friend of his died on the mainland who was young. We were family friends and they were a lot younger than we were. And I was so concerned for his wife because she wouldn't have thought about what would I do when my husband died because it wasn't time yet. So I decided I would write her every week for a year to support her since I was so far away. We were neighbors on the mainland, but I couldn't go over and hold her hand. So I thought I'll just write her something every week for the first year. And I thought I better make sure I've got 52 different things to say before I start this project. So I made a list and easily came up with 52 different things that I could talk to her about dealing with grief. And being a writer, I'd written college textbooks besides teaching writing. I thought this is an outline for a book. So I wrote the book, and that's what my two books are. The first one's the first 26 items on that list, and the second one is the second 26 items. And in doing all that, I really wanted to spend time with teaching people these writing things, so I started an online group. But I kept thinking something was missing, and I realized when I was thinking about after Jacques, my previous husband, died, that I had found a book, Happy for No Reason by Marcy Shimoff. And I thought happiness is what's missing. And so I started searching about Marcy and discovered she had a Happy for No Reason certified training program. And I thought, well, that'll help me on my way. So I did that. That led me to create the Grief and Happiness podcast. It led me to create the Grief and Happiness Alliance, which was that original writing group expanded to include happiness. So every week we meet and we write together, then we talk about what we wrote, and then we learn a happiness practice. And when I decided to do that, I knew that I didn't want to charge people for that because I felt everybody was entitled to this kind of support. So I had met with a pretty big group of friends from across my whole history to run this idea past them. And that group of friends decided that they would start a nonprofit organization to provide for the costs of doing this so that people wouldn't have to pay for this kind of help. So now we have the nonprofit organization too. So that's kind of a whole bunch in a short period of time.
So beautiful. And I love the story. What was your friend's name that you were sending?
Lori.
Lori. Was she aware that it would be a year, or was that a surprise?
No, I told her when I started, because right when Chap died, he just died and was driving home from work and died in the car. He wasn't in an accident or anything. He just died. And let's see, I'm losing my train of thought here. When I'm so sorry. I was right in the middle of saying something and it left me.
That's okay. It happens. I was asking, was she aware that you'd be
Oh,
sending?
was she aware? Okay. When
Yeah.
he died, I found out about it just a few hours after he died, and I immediately sat down and wrote her a letter because I knew that she wouldn't have any idea what to do. I said, these are the things you need to worry about, and these are the things that you don't need to be concerned about right now. And people are going to tell you that you do, but you don't. And she was so grateful for that. That's what led me to want to do more, and where the cards came from. So I told her that that's what I was, when I sent her the first one, I told her, this is what I'm going to do. You can expect this from me. And when that first book launched, she came to the launch. It was during the pandemic, so everything was on Zoom. And she was sitting in her backyard telling how much this meant to her. And she picked up the 52 cards and held them in her hand. She said she keeps them on her bedside table and refers to them all the time because they helped her so much. So I knew at that point I had to publish those cards so that other people could get the benefit from them too. So that's where the cards came from.
Really cool. Such a beautiful mission. And I imagine there are plenty of women, especially listening, that are like, wow, I would so see myself doing that. And, I even think about, like, I have a very dear friend. She's also a longtime student and client, graduate of the PA as well. And she is going through the transition of the physical loss of her beloved kitty cat named Olive. And Olive is almost 17 years old in the moment. And so I'm just even like, wow, what a beautiful gesture for us in her community, like to consider like sending her something in the mail, especially for those first few months when it's so tender and their entire world is shifted. So you mentioned something that I'd be so curious about, telling Lori, here's what you need to be concerned about. Here's what can wait. Can you share what some of those are?
Well, the first thing with being concerned that I tell anybody who asks me about what do I do when early grief is self-care.
Yeah.
Because that's usually the thing that falls to the bottom of the list with people who are grieving. They just don't think that it's important. They don't even think about it a lot of times. So that's extremely important. And I encouraged her to do that. You know, if too many people are there, say, I'm going to my room, I'm going to rest for a bit, you know, whatever it is you need to do to take care of yourself in the process, because you are what you have right now. And that's, you have to take care of you.
Mhm.
So that's the most important thing. And then when other people come, and as she knew so many people in the community where we lived, and I knew that they were all going to be coming over and giving her advice. You've got to do this, you've got to do that. I said, just say thank you and do what you want to do. You don't have to listen to any of that. If it serves you, great. If it doesn't, ignore it. You don't have to follow someone else's prescriptions for your good.
Yeah, such a good point. And also what I've experienced, and I think a lot of us feel the same, and it's been highlighted these last 4 years, especially, is we don't know what to say when we are witness to someone that we care about's profound grief. And it's very common. And there's no one way to get it right or wrong, to be honest. So, but what I have learned has worked, and I'm curious what your thoughts are, or not doesn't work, but what seems to land is, I'm sorry. I mean, that's about as much as anyone would anything else is now becomes a projection of our own pain, right? Our own loss, our own fears, our own anxieties. And so we say things because we don't know what else to say because someone else is grieving. Well, what would I want to hear? Well, that's not what they need to hear, or right, like might even be relative. But I remember Reverend Michael Beckwith of the Agape International Center of Truth, whom I know you're familiar with. And I remember him teaching us 20, 25 years ago, and I was under his guidance for almost 20 years. He said, there's just two words to say when someone's grieving, and it's, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What are your thoughts around that, in addition to, of course, having books and cards and podcasts?
Well, I agree with Michael. He actually wrote the preface for my first book.
Oh, I had
And
no idea. How cool is that?
yeah, he was
Oh, I
a
love
friend of
that.
my husband's when they were growing up in LA together. So
Way cool.
I knew him, and Ricky, is a
Wow,
dear
I was
friend
at
of mine.
Ricky and Michael's wedding.
Yeah,
We have,
she
I'm getting the chills. Yet another thing that we have in common, Emily.
yeah, I love Ricky. We're actually pretty close, done a
Oh,
lot of things together.
yeah.
But I'm sorry is great. I'm sorry for your loss is not. And
Right.
that's what people tend to say.
Yes.
So if you leave off that for your loss, then that's really important, because people, like, I don't feel like I lost either one of my husbands. That's kind of not a great thing to say. What I tell people to say that I think works really well is to say something kind about who they're grieving.
Yeah, that resonates.
And yeah, if you can call them by name, if you have a personal reference, that's great. If you
Mhm.
don't, you can say something like, well, I'm sure you really miss them,
Oh,
or something like that. And I know when my husband Jacques was a marvelous singer, and people would tell me about how much they enjoyed listening to him and watching him perform, and that they'd go wherever they saw that he was going to be performing. And with Ron was an incredible person with guidance and inspiration for people. And people would always say something, people that had worked with him in any way would say, you know what he did for me, or how much I got from our
mm,
relationship. That was fabulous to hear those kinds of things instead of, I'm sorry for your loss, which
yeah.
sounds kind of like, have a nice day.
Oh, totally, right? That's but because we haven't been told, we're not taught on death, right?
Mhm.
Which is a beautiful honoring and cycle of life, the samsara cycle, death, rebirth, and it literally happens in the literal, in the metaphorical. That's really beautiful. I hadn't even thought about that. Is there a window based on your experience and or observation and guidance of so many that maybe that of, I'm sure you really miss him or her, or bringing up something special and really meaningful about them and their name. Is there a window where that might be too soon in your
No,
experience? Okay.
not that. Other things it could be. that hearing something kind and loving about your loved one,
Mm.
they might cry when you do it, and that's okay.
I'm crying as you're saying it because
Yeah.
I'm really feeling into the tenderness and the potency of that moment of someone witnessing you in your deepest grief and just saying something kind, not so that they can get out of processing their own grief and not knowing how to manage their own feelings, right? But just truly seeing another in a moment where they need to be seen. Yeah,
That's right.
it's beautiful. Thank you for that. You also mentioned self-care and that it's very easy for that to be a distant, if not far off, doesn't happen priority. What are some of those ways to self-care when you are navigating such profound grief? I imagine it's not just a bubble bath, it's deeper.
Yeah, that was just what I was thinking.
Yes, right.
People immediately go to bubble bath or
Although
massage or
that does
something
sound
like
nice
that.
if someone else could draw it, get me in there, just rub
Yeah.
me, right? Light a candle, like just love on me. Like that sounds good, but that's a very special situation.
Yeah, yeah. So for me, self-care was considering where I was and what I was dealing with at the moment. And I did that best by journaling. Every morning when I'd wake up, before I got out of bed, I've got a bed that raises up so I can sit in my bed. And before I get out of bed, I write in my journal. And that way I can get things in perspective for that moment.
You're so
And then for
fresh from
that
the other side
day.
of the veil too, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the perfect time to do it. It's also a good time to do it right before you go to bed.
Mm.
And it's also good to do it when you're inspired to in the daytime. Sometime you might have something that comes along.
Mhm.
Another thing that I do, uh, I'm not sure if it's right away in early grief, but I've done it for a long time, is when I'm really missing someone or I'm thinking about them a lot, I will, in my journal, write them a letter,
Mm.
just like I was talking to them in person.
Yeah.
And the thing that can be really magical about that is when I finish writing the letter, I write a letter back to me from them,
Yeah. Wow.
and it's profound.
Mm.
And I can't tell you for sure whether that's what I want to hear that I write back or whether it's being channeled or however it comes to me. Whatever it is, it provides great comfort.
Mm. Mhm. God, that's really deep. Thank you for that. I can see that because ultimately you're allowing the channeling, right, through the soul transmission, higher self, oversoul, however we want to language that resonates most at this moment. But it's no longer you, Emily, the human, right? It's just coming through. And then it's no longer the person, Jacques or Ron, your two previous husbands who've passed. And we got to talk about that. I mean, what are the chances? But it's allowing for the essence of what needs to come through, connect you beyond.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that. That is so powerful. Anything else in the self-care before I do kind of open
No,
up?
I just do it. Whatever it is for you, do it. If you need to crochet or watercolor or go for a walk or go swimming or whatever it is, do it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's something that where did I hear this recently? It was, I don't know, a podcast or something, but it was talking about how where are we out of balance with any of our true self-care, like our sacred rituals and practices, so that we feel inner resourceful, right? Our connection with God, our divine team. Like it's so interesting how that's oftentimes the first thing that we let go of when we get busy or when we're in a new sort of feeling tone and deep grief. It's like, whew, all we can really probably do is be in the now, which is a really potent place to be. But I don't know if in grief we are. I don't know how deeply affected by grief in the physical I've been, but I've definitely felt a profound, dark, heavy, dense grief that I'm now moving out of. And I have been since about February of this year. But for the last 3 years, just waking up to the world and seeing so many relational dynamics shift and the grief in that, the grief in a reality that I thought once was that's no longer and actually never was, the grief of the innocence and the purity of my own soul that believed in certain people, the grief of certain partnerships or personal relationships, including my own family, that we're just so misaligned in values and perceptions of lenses of reality. And you get the gist. It's endless, right? It's like the Russian dolls of grief, right?
Mhm.
And so I noticed that I was carrying that in my heart. And so for me, I had to go on a deep healing protocol of grief that was stored in my lungs, that the smoking of the cigarettes up until last year, June, um, suppressed. And then it was just so up for healing. And that was a tough, tough journey. But what I did do, to your point, is I tripled down on my rituals. And what I found was a deeper connection with God or my teachers, my guides. So that level of self-care was something I had never fully devoted myself to. And so what you're sharing here, I remember. And it's so interesting because it wasn't the physical loss. And that's what I wanted to, we'll actually go there before the two husbands. But can we speak to what you're experiencing as a guide in your nonprofit and all the people that you touch around so much grief in the transitions and the loss of either the physical or not of the past few years, and how you've seen support in that way that might be helpful for our listeners or viewers?
Well, the thing that I've really seen in the way of support with all that I do is being able to talk to other people who are having similar experiences going on. Because so many times we feel like we're the only one that feels that way, or that we're the only one that's experiencing this, and no one could hurt as much as I do right now.
Mm.
And when you have the opportunity to talk to other people and they go, oh, I did that, or I felt that, or I'm going through that, then you can have a real heart-to-heart talk with these people, and it can make a huge difference.
Yeah. Community is the medicine. And that reminds me just how grateful I am, like for my own podcast and the people who are so loyal from all around the world, right? We found each other in these times. And I know that your podcast, the Grief and Happiness Show, is doing the same. And what would you say are some of the biggest myths around the grieving process, and or even the old sort of, these are the stages of grief? It feels like a lot of that is just been, you know, I don't even know the right word, dissolved. Like, no, there's so much. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
But that's interesting. My husband, Jacques, was a bioethicist, and he was really early. He was a lot older than I am, and was really early in the field of death and dying. And he actually did a sabbatical in London or in England to work with the early hospice development. And then he brought Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to our community before I knew him.
I don't know who she.
She's the one that did the stages of grief.
Oh,
She's the
interesting.
person who wrote
Okay,
it.
thank you for bringing
On
that
Death
up.
and Dying is
Okay.
her book that is all this was kind of built on that. Well, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote The Five Stages of Dying,
Mm-hmm.
and people got that conflated with grief, and eventually she wrote about grief that was using the same sort of a thing. And when I was researching for my book, I thought I'm just going to look this up, and I found everything from like the 22 stages of grief to the 3 stages of grief. You know, everybody has their own thing about what stages are, and I say forget about the stages.
Yeah.
Experience what you experience. Maybe talk to other people who are grieving, and they'll go, oh, I felt that too, or oh, I'm dealing with that too. And that gives you your validation. You don't need to have something that somebody wrote a list about.
That's really good. I love that. And it's reminded me of my own process, even just in these past, well, especially these past few years, the profound grief that I had felt and still feel in moments, but way, way, way less, by like 80%, thank goodness. So that's, okay, just keep going, right? But what am I feeling right now? And there were so many times, especially when I got really present to just how much was being stored in my lungs, which is common. And needing to wail, needing to rage, needing to breathe deeply and just move all that energy through, or just allow myself to swamp in it, just to feel it, to just almost rage, almost just like, yeah, just, ooh, it was so intense. I'm remembering like 3 specific moments right now in my living room, which is where my altar is. And it's a healing sanctuary. I've done a lot of work in that living room, and I'm remembering, yeah, it just felt like out of control, but that's how everything felt. That's the process, but it really does get better with time. And so, gosh, I feel like There's so much we could cover, but I know that we have a limited window. So I want to circle back to Jacques and Ron. And what do you know to be true about why you were gifted or experienced marrying two different men that both passed while married?
That's an interesting question. I don't think anybody's asked me that before. They were polar opposites in some ways. As I mentioned, Jacques was a bioethicist, chair of the philosophy department at the college where he taught. And Ron was a New Thought minister. So
Very
they're
different. Wow.
just Ron was, or Jacques was 21 years older than I am. And that was quite unusual. And he was half Italian, half Sicilian. And Ron was about my age and black. So again, polar
Very
opposites.
different.
So all those things were opposite. However, they both died of the same thing. They both, for the last 2 years of their life, went through very similar experiences. And I cared for both of them during the last 2 years of their life when they went through those experiences. And one of my past careers way back was I was a nurse. I also was an ambulance attendant starting when I was 14 years old, but that's another story, a family thing that I was immersed in healthcare and that sort of thing for so long.
You were being prepared every part of your journey, and you continue to walk this path. Wow.
Yeah, and I learned a lot with dealing with Jacques that I could again help deal with Ron, knowing what to anticipate and how to handle things. That led very interesting, but it would take a moment to tell you about it. But I was grateful for the opportunity. I kept thinking, I'm so glad that I was here to take care of them. Both of them had been married before, and I think both of them were kind of concerned about maybe having to be alone at the end. And I got to be with both of them.
So I knew there was a reason why that question was coming through, and I find it astonishing that no one has ever asked you that question. And especially because your response is what I actually thought was going to come through, that you do see it as a gift. You see it as a great privilege and honor, and there's no victim in your essence at all of how could I've had two men that came into my life, these great loves, and I lost them both. Like, you just have completely expanded beyond that narrative that so many fall victim to. It's not their fault. We're programmed, right? Who am I without a partner? Why is this happening to me? You're the opposite of that. And if there's anything that our listeners and viewers can take away, it's getting present to what are the stories that we're telling ourselves about why this is happening. So in our last few minutes together, how does that impact our ability to experience joy and the happiness that you claim is also right here simultaneously, that feels like a paradox, but isn't that life?
That's an interesting question, because that was how I was going to, what I wanted to say next.
So cool.
Was that through everything that's come to me with all these different things, with the books and the alliance and the cards and the nonprofit and the podcast and all these things that all developed, it came from dealing with both of those losses, and in addition to a lot of other losses in my life. But the key thing is, and people are often surprised when I say this, I'm happier now than I ever have been. And I'm sure it's because of the opportunity to live the life I've lived, and now the gift of being able to do the work I'm doing.
That is so beautiful, so rich. Yeah, because you are in service to others, and that is the essence of these times. That is the whole point of the Great Awakening, right? And New Earth and everything that I know that you also are aligned with. In our last couple of minutes, how would you describe or define for yourself in your own unique way what happiness is?
Happiness is freedom
Mm.
That probably sounds like a
I
strange
love it. I love it. My
definition.
whole soul just got activated. Like,
Oh, good. It really is, because I'm happy because I'm not carrying a lot of baggage about, oh, what could have been or what should have been or what I could do or what I could have. I don't have that.
Mm.
And that leaves space for the happiness experience and to be able to do that.
Mm.
And I truly am, it's so neat to just look around and go, I don't have anything to complain about.
Mm.
You know, if there's something that needs to be done, I don't complain about it. I do it.
Yeah.
Whatever it is,
Mm.
that old saying of go with the flow. I just kind of pay attention to what's going on and experience what I need to experience, love what I need to love, do what I need to do, whatever it is. And I don't really say I need, I should say I get to.
Beautiful. The way I interpreted that, and maybe this is just because it's what I'm currently navigating, and freedom is such an important core value, but not in the ways in which we might imagine. Just like you said, it's a freedom of ability to consciously choose my chosen state, to
There you
consciously
go.
choose my focus, to consciously choose my moment. And so as you were sharing, I thought happiness is the now, because our
Mhm.
freedom can only be experienced in the now, right?
As your happiness.
Totally. It's so beautiful. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that I asked that question. And is there anything else now that we are truly wrapping? And I honestly feel like we could talk so much about this. I feel like it's the most important topic. So that said, is there anything that needs to come through that you wish you'd been asked?
Uh, I feel really good about what we talked about, and I would encourage, like I said about self-care, anybody, you have to take care of yourself first.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
when you do that, you can find this happiness. You can live in happiness. You can forgive everything that needs to be forgiven. You can let go of blame and anything like that, so that you're really living in a positive space that allows you to experience that happiness.
Oh, that is so good. That's another dimension of self-care, of just the way I got this visual as you were sharing, and we've talked about it a lot here on Fire and Soul, is all thoughts, beliefs, it's all energetic patterns. And some are really dense and low frequency, some are lighter, higher frequency. None of them are bad. It's just what are we navigating right now? But the more that we can get present to lack of forgiveness, judgment of others, which definitely impacts the vibration and frequency weight, right? But the more that we can let that go and release that, which we hear all the time, but these are the times of like, oh, that's running me. But if I can be willing and courageous enough to let it go, then I can actually free myself up. And that's that's a new quantum level of self-care.
Hmm.
Yeah, just redirecting energetic patterns for good. And that's
Hmm.
the work that I see you doing. Also, I want to let everyone know you can get a lot of information on two different websites, and I'll link them in the show notes, griefandhappiness.com and loving and living your way through grief. Can you just explain the difference between the two real quick?
Well, as I said about those 52 things
Yeah,
that I wrote about, one of the books has 50 or 26 of them, and the other one has the other 26.
beautiful.
And the Grief and Happiness Handbook has a lot of, at the end of each chapter, it's like a workbook that you can use what you learned to explore.
I love that. Okay, perfect. And then where's the best place or platform for people to connect with you should they choose?
Um, Go to griefandhappiness.com and you can get to me there, or Emily at griefandhappiness.com if you want to talk to me
And of
personally.
course, tune into your podcast. So, the Grief and Happiness podcast, and you always have such great guests. We have a lot of similar guests on. So, this is just another lens, right, to connect with people because of your content, really, going through the portal of grief, happiness, same time. Yes. And Mark Nepo, Marcy Shimoff. I mean, you've had extraordinary guests on your show. And so, I want to honor your path as a podcaster and the mission that you have chosen to step into so fully, and the honoring of that through the the passing and the physical of both Jacques and Ron. I also want to honor them, because they have given you so much perspective and truly helped you to see how even more clearly this path is what you are meant to walk in these times to help so many. So I want to thank you, my friend, for the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's been so fun to be on this path with you.
I'm grateful for this. I knew that I found you for a reason.
Well, I feel so grateful as well. So thank you, thank you. And it's just an absolute pleasure to have had you join finally on Fire and Soul. Thank you, Miss Emily. Aloha.
Aloha.